send everybody to Walmart. I mean, they're 30% cheaper. A lot of retirees barely survive on what they have, and they're going to give them a 30% cut in their food costs? I mean, an increase in their food costs? This kind of thinking, we have to think like a people in a group.
Who said that, Hal?
It was in, I believe, the Washington Post.
I got to tell you. We're going to have to talk about that one next time. But.
Well, what we can talk about next time is there's a commission, a bipartisan commission on military pay, because it's going to take up over half the congressional budget and retirements. The cost of over a decade of war ramp up real quick.
Yeah, they do. All right, Hal. Hey, listen, you have a great weekend. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Take care, Charles. Glad to be here, as always.
Hal Donahue of What Vets Need to Know. I'm Charles Showalter. You're listening to the Union Edge Laborers Talk Radio.
Members of the American Postal Workers Union handle more than 165 billion letters and packages a year. That's about 34 million pounds of mail every day. Ever wonder what this costs you as a taxpayer? Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions? Not a single cent. The United States Postal Service doesn't run on your tax dollars. It's funded solely by stamps and postage. Brought to you by the men and women of the American Postal.
With your Working Virginia update, I'm Jesse Russell. Virginia families who rely on food assistance saw a cut in their federal benefits effective November 1st. Allison Burns reports.
Voices for Virginia's Children policy analyst Amy Woolard says that means Virginia families will see a reduction in benefits of about 5.5% or $36 a month for a family of 4.
So with benefits only equating to about $4 per day per person, or about $1.40 per meal, that really means families and children will be struggling to make up several days' worth of meals each month heading into winter.
Woolard says most of the food stamp recipients in Virginia are children, the elderly, and disabled.
Food insecurity leads to greater risks for things like childhood obesity and other chronic conditions like asthma, anemia, pneumonia.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
What happens to prosecutors who intentionally ship people to prison for 25 years even though they know the defendant is innocent?
I'm Martin Espada, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Consider Ken Anderson, the Texas former prosecutor and judge who decades ago convicted Michael Morton of murdering his wife. For 25 years, that judge and former prosecutor allowed Morton to languish in prison, even though he knew he had intentionally withheld from the defense evidence that proved Morton's innocence. For 25 years. 25 years. Unlike most of these cases, here, eventually, the prosecutor was found out. It's not newsworthy that a prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence. It's the leading reason for wrongful convictions in America. But what is newsworthy is that here, something is actually going to happen to the prosecutor. In November, the judge, the former prosecutor, was sentenced to 10 days in jail for criminal contempt. 10 days compared to 25 years, and that's justice? Well, in a sense, yes. Because the answer to the question, what happens to police and prosecutors who intentionally withhold exculpatory evidence and cause innocent people to be sent to prison for decades and decades and perhaps life, generally speaking, the answer to the question, what happens to them, is nothing.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union at aclu.org, because even in the Republic of Poetry, freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings. We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown. We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full. But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Win Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Postal Service is making one of the most substantial changes in years, expanding to Sunday parcel delivery. Jesse Russell reports.
The Postal Service is undergoing a significant change as it moves towards Sunday parcel delivery. The announcement comes after months of debate on Capitol Hill regarding postal reform, which included not expanding but contracting delivery by eliminating Saturday service. The program will start with Sunday delivery of Amazon.com packages and is launching in Los Angeles County and New York City. John Beaumont is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers.
We've just hired recently approximately 35,000 career carrier assistants. Now, these are new employees. They will become career after they've been in the service for a little over 2 years after someone retires. And as they come in, these jobs, especially the Sunday jobs, a lot of them are going to the career carrier assistants. Of these career carrier assistants, almost 25% of them are United States veterans coming back from the Middle East.
He said the addition of Sunday delivery will give the Postal Service an advantage over UPS and FedEx.
Amazon.com tried to work with some of the other companies, and they didn't have the network to go ahead and handle this and get it out. So it's not like this service was offered exclusively to the post office. It actually was, I understand it was either actually to FedEx or UPS first, and our network was actually able to handle it better to get out there.
Hundreds of taxi drivers in the Teamster-affiliated Washington, D.C. Taxi Operators Association are accusing the D.C. Taxicab Commission of stifling speech. The commission required written testimony in advance because some commissioners say it's hard for them to understand some people with accents. The union cab drivers say that explanation is abhorrent, discriminatory, and unlawful. The union taxi drivers were at the meeting to protest what they say is unfair towing and ticketing of cabs. The union wants D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray to direct the commission to immediately halt its practice of requiring written testimony in advance. 3 Democratic U.S. senators and 3 Democratic U.S. representatives have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act of 2013. Senator Tammy Baldwin says the act protects the constitutional reproductive rights of women to make their own private health decisions. Baldwin says it will, quote, protect a woman's right to safe and legal reproductive health services by stopping restrictive regulations and laws, such as those in place in states including Texas and Wisconsin, intended to curtail reproductive health services for women, end quote. I'm Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Since 2002, Workers Independent News has put worker voices and issues on hundreds of radio stations. But unless we raise enough money very quickly, that ends November 15th. So please go to laborradio.org and click Donate Now to save WIN. Madison, Wisconsin-based Workers Independent News was in the thick of the 2011 Wisconsin worker uprising that inspired the world. Inspire us now by saving Workers Independent News. laborradio.org and click Donate. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Karl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Hello and welcome to Take Action News. All weekend, I'm Karl Frisch. You can find more about me at karlfrisch.com. Be sure to sign up for my email list and follow me at Karl Frisch on Facebook and Twitter. Don't forget to connect with the show at takeactionnews.com. We've got Peter and Troy on controls, and I want to give a special shout out to our affiliate in Chicago, WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Now let's get on with the news. Last week, the Senate passed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would prohibit employment discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation. Similar bills have been periodically introduced since 1974, but it wasn't until 2007 that the act included protections for the transgender community. Now that the bill has passed overwhelmingly in the Senate, it's becoming difficult for Speaker John Boehner to justify dismissing it. In a press conference following the Senate vote, Boehner insisted that he's opposed to discrimination of any kind, so it's a good thing that all Americans are already protected from employment discrimination.
Listen, I am opposed to discrimination of any kind in the workplace and any place else. But I think this legislation that I've dealt with as chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee long before I was back in the leadership, is unnecessary and would provide a basis for frivolous lawsuits. People are already protected in the workplace. So I'm opposed to continuing this. Listen, I understand people have different opinions on this issue, and I respect those opinions. But as someone who's worked in this employment law area for all of my years in the State House and all of my years here, I see no basis or no need.
Well, Banner might be rounding up since race, gender, and disability are all protected categories. It is still legal for an employer to fire someone for even suspecting that they're gay in 29 states. The numbers are even worse for transgender Americans. However, the Speaker is not hanging his hat on the argument that ENDA is redundant legislation. Spokesman Michael Steele, whom I've met before, said the Speaker believes the bill will increase frivolous litigation and cost Americans jobs, especially small business jobs. When asked by the San Francisco Gate exactly what these frivolous suits might entail, Steele replied that the bill included especially vague language that does not exist elsewhere in federal non-discrimination law. The cost to employers, the cost of litigating the frivolous suits of opportunistic people claiming to have been wrongfully fired or passed over for a job. Other voices on the right who have pointed to the supposed vagueness of the law, invoking long-standing prejudices associated with homosexuality. Last month, Matt Barber of the hate group Liberty Counsel, which is a nonprofit that provides free legal counsel in defense of what the so-called traditional family, went on Fox News correspondent Sandy Rios' radio show to argue against ENDA.
We have laws like ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, being pushed, hate crimes legislation, and that are, as you point out so well, Wendy, that are, very vague in their definition of what is sexual orientation. When will we will arrive at the point where these people who define their sexual orientation by a sexual attraction to children want to be lumped in among those who cannot be discriminated against based upon their, quote, sexual orientation.
Keep it classy, Matt. It's arguments like these that make ENDA especially important in today's political climate. For transgender people who arguably have received less acceptance than their LGBT people, the bill is especially crucial. Earlier this month, the Washington Times editorial board, a right-wing newspaper, described ENDA as a detriment to office propriety, writing, quote, employers, religious killer, should have the right to insist that men dress like men in the workplace. He can dress in Milady's frilliest frock, where such frocks on men are better appreciated. The editorial concluded that special protections have no place in the law. Later in the program, we'll be joined by Get Equal's Heather Conk to discuss why ENDA is still a vital piece of civil rights legislation. While the far right struggles to poke holes in an increasingly popular and bipartisan piece of legislation, you may have noticed that Kentucky Senator Rand Paul continues to make news for making truly insane claims. Up next, Tina Dupuis will speculate as to how the Beltway chattering class might react if the senator were a woman. She's got a great piece in The Atlantic that captures the double standards we subject women in power to. In the third hour, we'll be joined by the always funny Andy Cobb to talk about some of the incredibly inappropriate jokes delivered at a closed-door roast of Dick Cheney earlier this month. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. We'll be back after this.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
Friends, David Shuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. All weekend, I'm Karl Frisch. Tina Dupuis is going to be joining us in just a bit. She's got a couple great pieces out this week. Our good friend, Tina Dupuis, the syndicated columnist. Her first piece, which we'll dig into a little bit before we get her on the phone, she's got out is Unsafe at Any Speed. This is her syndicated column. And it deals with a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the NFL, or the NFL's lack of ability to grapple with what it's causing among its players. You've probably seen a little bit about this over the last couple years bubbling up. Tina writes, we turn up our collective noses at the brutality of ancient Rome's gladiator combat games. These bloody, brutal, and deadly contests were decadent displays of an indulgent yet morally primitive culture, we tell ourselves. Athletes were slaughtered for entertainment of the Roman citizens, sacrificed for their amusement. Every gasp in disgust is what the ancient Romans did to the Colosseum guests that we somehow think we are better than. She goes on to talk about chronic traumatic let's see if I can get this. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. I'm sorry. I'm glad I didn't go to medical school. CTE, as it is called for short. which a lot of football players end up getting. It's a progressive degenerative disease caused by concussions. It's referred to as repetitive mild traumatic brain injuries, or the more graphic term, brain slosh, if you can imagine. CTE has 4 documented stages, and it's most prevalent in boxers, football players, and hockey players. The symptoms are depression, confusion, impulsivity, aggression, memory loss, dementia, and suicide. You may remember the story about the football player who rented a motel room, and then shot himself in the chest, leaving his brain to be studied by science. And we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of Kansas City Chiefs linebacker Jovan Belcher, the 25-year-old who shot the mother of his 3-month-old multiple times before going to a Chiefs practice facility and shooting himself in the head as the team's general manager, head coach, and a linebacker looked on. Because of the new way that we test for CTE ante-mortem, it's also called the UCLA method. We now know that we actually know some players that have this before they die now. And some of those folks that we know of include Mark Duper, he's from the Miami Dolphins, Pro Football Hall of Famers Tony Dorsett and Joe Delmure, and all-pro defensive lineman Leonard Marshall. And the results are just preliminary, so we know that a lot more players have this. And over the years, the NFL's response has not been, gee, let's look for a better way to handle this. It's been to ignore, to obfuscate. It's as if they've learned everything they can, they have from the tobacco lobby or the big oil companies, in the way that they just deny that this is a reality. And it's funny because they deny it's a reality while offering their players new helmets, like supposedly safer helmets. I don't know if they realize it, but if you're going to offer your players quote unquote safer helmets, you're basically admitting that there's a problem. And so now I guess we're getting to a point where they're going to start having players sign waivers saying that they, acknowledge that there are these types of problems that can occur. But you're talking about generations of not just professional athletes that are going to have these problems, but also, college athletes, high school athletes. I've got a nephew who plays peewee football, and he's in Texas. They take it very seriously in Texas. They have a draft for peewee football in Texas, if you can believe it, at least where my sister and her family live. Like I said, they take it seriously. It's a big part of the culture there. So what does it say when a big part of the culture, and for a lot of these kids, it's their only way out for college other than the military. What does it say about that this is so horribly dangerous? You're talking about men who are at the pinnacle of their health in every other, measurable instance, that develop Alzheimer's at young ages, who have what is now affectionately called brain slosh. I mean, it's just insane. So Tina goes on to talk about it, and it's really a moral question for us, that this is for our amusement, that we're sacrificing these young men for our amusement. She's also got a good piece over at The Atlantic, and it concerns Rand Paul. And whether or not the media would be responding to him any differently if he were a woman. Because, especially if you look at like the last couple weeks of Rand Paul coverage, where we've basically found out that his speechwriter is more of a glorified copy and paster. You may have seen the stories about Rand Paul giving speeches where he quoted directly from, spoke directly from the words of Wikipedia to give movie plots. And then we found out that he was also plagiarizing parts of his book from think tank studies, like entire pages of his book were just copied verbatim from think tank studies, or that his newspaper columns were often copies of news stories from right-wing outlets. How would that be covered if he was a woman senator? I think we may have seen things a little differently. So joining us now to talk about her great piece on Rand Paul is Tina Dupuis. Hey, Tina.
Hi, Carl.
So how would it be different for Rand Paul? I mean, I was just saying that we've seen a lot of coverage about him in the last 10 days about his penchant for copy and pasting the work of others into his spoken words and written words. But how would he be covered differently if he were a woman?
If he were a woman, he would have no credibility to lose from a plagiarism scandal. Because really, Rand Paul has a problem with facts. He kind of fudges numbers. He can't quite get the deficit and the debt straight. He mixes those up all the time. He says really weird things, like when asked for a non-dead Fed chairman that would be his ideal, he, of course, gave the name of a dead guy. And he just kind of if he were a woman, and God forbid a beautiful woman, he'd be treated like a child, and the internet would break out in a rash of mansplaining, and there would be think pieces about how she's not that bright, but she's ambitious, the kind of same condescending things that we hear about a lot of female politicians. But for some reason, Rand Paul has gotten a pass on this because I'm guessing the only reasonable explanation is that he's a man.
Would he be? So he'd basically be subject.
Otherwise, he's a bimbo, and he says, really kind of dingbatty things. And candidly, he's an airhead. But since he doesn't look like an airhead, he gets a pass on saying really, really stupid things.
And what do you think that he'd be treated to more the same kind of coverage that Michelle Bachmann gets if he were a woman?
Exactly, or Sarah Palin, or worse.
I actually feel like Sarah Palin doesn't get the fair treatment that she deserves in terms of ridicule. I think people give her too much credit. But Bachmann seems to get just about the right amount of coverage for how stupid she is. What do you think? Is there something about the Beltway media that they just take him more seriously because he's a man, and does any of it have to do with how popular he is with the Republicans? We might have lost Tina. She was on the subway there. But I encourage you to go and check out her piece at The Atlantic. What if Rand Paul were a woman? Any female politician as sloppy with matters of fact and attribution as the Kentucky senator would be laughed out of Washington. I don't know if they'd be laughed out of Washington entirely, because there's certainly a number of just insanely stupid Republicans in Washington. I think we probably wouldn't be taking him nearly as seriously if he were here, if he were a woman. And ultimately, I think it's on all of us to hold him to the same standard that we would hold anybody else. If he is going to continue to plagiarize things, then we need we should be holding him accountable. And we should be pointing out that he has a very big problem with sticking to the facts. I mean, what's interesting, we talk about the plagiarism issue of late. He also had a penchant for hiring this racist dude that worked for him, and he didn't want to fire him. But for some reason, he's holding on to this press person that works for him that has no ability to write, original content for the senator. I wouldn't blame the senator directly for having, plagiarized, because let's be honest, he's a senator. He's not writing every word of a speech or writing every word of a newspaper column or his book, but he is reading it and he is passing it off as his own work. So it's on him to hire the kinds of people that aren't going to subject him to this kind of ridicule. You can't expect him to know that something from a newspaper column or his book or one of his speeches is copied directly from something else. Senators don't have the time to go and check that kind of stuff. But you can hold him responsible for this mistake repeating itself over and over and over and over again. Because if you were in an academic setting, I know those words scare Republicans, communist academics. If you were in an academic setting and this was happening, you'd be out after the first offense. And that's pretty much where Rand Paul should be. Had the pressure not grown over his racist employee, I don't think we would have ever seen him fire that employee or ask him to leave. And so here we are, his press staff obviously plagiarizing a lot of the work that Rand Paul has passed off as his own. And then to watch him try and defend it as, I should have footnoted these things better. And the media is taking great delight now in the fact that Rand Paul is now offering like 25 footnotes in his speeches. You got 25 footnotes in a speech. It's hysterical because the point was not that he wasn't footnoting his work. It wasn't that he didn't say so-and-so and such said the Washington Post. It's that he said so-and-so and such without ever indicating that he had gotten so-and-so and such, the exact language from the Washington Post. And that's where the plagiarism charge comes in. And for him to attack others for pointing it out is just ridiculous. I think we've got Tina back.
Hey, Carl.
So you're on the subway, as I was telling people. But so he's obviously, he does get his fair share of coverage, making him sound like a serious Do you think that one of the reasons that he is treated differently than maybe a woman politician is because of how well he does in the polls with Republicans and because he's one of the Paul families? He's part of the Paul family?
That might be some of it. I mean, he kind of has like the best of both worlds where his supporters say that he doesn't get treated fairly by the mainstream media while he's on the Sunday shows, and candidly a staple of the Sunday shows every single week. So, which is about as mainstream as you get. So he's kind of having this dream coverage. And the fact that he's not really having major fallout from not just one incident of plagiarism,
but many.
Spread.
It shows how much of a pass they're willing to let him have.
Really
Tina,
getting a huge pass.
Tina, folks can follow you at TinaDupuy.com, on Twitter at TinaDupuy. Thanks a lot for joining us. Check out her work at The Atlantic, What If Rand Paul Were a Woman? I'm Karl Frisch. This is Take Action News, and we'll be back after this.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with a polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Dann shall we deal with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. All weekend, I'm Karl Frisch. So if you've been paying attention to the Benghazi hoax, as I'm now calling it, thanks to the great book by David Brock and Ari Rabenhoft, you probably saw that CBS News, 60 Minutes, had to retract their story about Benghazi, and they did it with great gusto, or they should have done it with more gusto. They basically gave their retraction 90 seconds of treatment at the end of their program this past weekend. And a lot of people are not happy with that. And one of the people who you just have to read regarding this stuff is Eric Bollert, good friend of ours at Media Matters. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Hey, how are you?
Good. So walk us through this. I mean, you wrote a piece that was up at Huffington Post, we're sorry but not sorry. Their apology really wasn't much of an apology, was it?
No. So CBS is sort of just compounding their own problems, which leads to the question of why are they almost fanatically resisting appointing an outside review panel to look at this.
And for folks that don't know, during the what the right wing called Rathergate, CBS bent over backwards to appease the right-wing critics who said that Rather's report was inaccurate or used forged documents, which was never conclusively proved, by appointing an independent investigative group and even contemplating putting folks like Rush Limbaugh or Ann Coulter on that group.
Yeah, and they settled with Richard Thornburgh, former Republican Attorney General.
Right.
And we later found out they were thinking about Warren Rudman, sort of independent Republican senator from New Hampshire, and we found out from internal documents that CBS was afraid that would not, quote, mollify the conservative critics. So they ditched him, went with Richard Thornburgh, gave him complete access to all the CBS employees' notes, emails, draft scripts. They spent 3 months, interviewed 66 people, issued an at times scathing 234-page report. And for Benghazi, we got a 90-second apology at the tail end of last Sunday night.
And it really wasn't much of an apology either.
No, not at all. No, very passive, very limited. We were duped. We were the victims. This fake eyewitness who we built our entire story around.
The guy that was the product of our year-long investigation. So if he, so obviously CBS News, 60 Minutes are doing the exact same thing, and they've asked the good folks at Media Matters to be on an investigative committee, right?
Right. So if it was the exact same thing, Janet Reno would now be investigating CBS. They'd get a former Democratic Attorney General, and they'd contemplate calling Paul Krugman and Rachel Maddow and, sort of come in. So,
well, as if they, just right there, that's a good example of how little progressives are taken seriously in the mainstream press. There is no comparable example of somebody with the profile of Rush Limbaugh or Ann Coulter on the left.
Not crazy, yeah, right. No, not the profile, and not.
I mean, we have crazy liberals. We have them. They just don't get the platform that crazy conservatives get.
And they're not taken seriously in places like CBS News. So they've decided. So originally it was, we're going to do this passive, limited, timid quote apology, and that was, CBS told the New York Times last week, that was going to be the final word. We're moving forward. We've already gotten past this. We're sorry, but mistakes happen. But the pressure just kept mounting and mounting. And then CBS came forward this week and said, we have a journalistic review underway, and it started right when we found out there were troubles with the report.
What is a journalistic review?
It sounds like CYA, right?
Right.
It sounds like cover you know what, and
it sounds like what you're supposed to do before you report a story.
They're going to fact check. As Stephen Colbert said, they're going to fact check their story for reals this time.
Yeah.
So they're going to go. And now Politico just had a piece in the last couple hours saying they found out who is overseeing this journalistic review. It's an executive inside inside CBS News, and he's going to, we don't know what he's going to do, and there's still no indication that this review will be made public. And here's the big problem, and here's like the painfully obvious reason there should be an independent review, which again CBS is like fanatically opposed to. Here's the monumental problem. Jeff Fager is the chairman of CBS News.
Right.
Jeff Fager is also the executive producer of 60 Minutes. So if there's going to be a review in terms of what went wrong, and something went historically wrong with the Benghazi report, the executive producer of 60 Minutes is absolutely going to be in a buttload of trouble. So you work for 60 Minutes. So you work for CBS. You're going to overview. You're going to oversee.
Yeah, anybody that comes from CBS News works for the guy who also is executive producer of the show.
Yeah, right. So it would be bad enough if the chairman of CBS News asked you to do an internal review, and then you got to do this review of this debacle that the chairman oversaw as the chairman. That's embarrassing enough. But you've got to oversee a debacle that the chairman was actually executive producer of this debacle. And here's the point: for the National Guard review,
right,
one of the people that got fired was the executive producer of 60 Minutes 2, which aired the National Guard story. If there was a comparable review, I don't see how the executive producer of 60 Minutes would survive an independent review of Benghazi.
Well, and if you can't survive...
the executive producer is the chairman of CBS News.
Right, and if you don't get to keep your job at 60 Minutes, then you probably shouldn't be able to keep your job at CBS News.
There seems to be a corporate calculation that that an independent review would leave them vulnerable to too much. And so, amazingly, 60 Minutes is willing to just take on all of this criticism, just across the board, every journalism professional who in the business. And they're still coming out. The former head of NBC News today just, sort of issued another broadside. The former head of ABC News this week was just like, what are they doing? So it's amazing that CBS has made a calculated decision that they will take on all of this criticism, all of these denunciations, and they still think it's better than having an independent review. And in my mind, that tells you that the mistakes and the oversights here were absolutely colossal and would have cost lots of very important people their jobs.
Well, one thing that I read was that part of the problem here is the way that CBS might be looking at their talent. So with Dan Rather, they saw somebody who was drawing a very mighty paycheck, who was in his later years, and eventually they were going to have to get rid of him anyways to bring in new blood. And with Laura Logan, they're talking about somebody who they're just starting to invest in and somebody who's going to be around for a long time.
That's certainly possible. I mean, she is clearly sort of a rising star. And again, if that may be part of this calculation, like we cannot afford to lose Logan over this. And what we haven't really mentioned yet is this whole fiasco was based on CBS wanting to sort of wade into those right-wing waters. There are lingering questions about Benghazi. The the subtext of this whole CBS report, was the White House was, slept through Benghazi, and these people were left behind, and all of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's only lingering questions. There's only lingering questions if you're refusing to accept the perfectly plausible and true answers.
Yeah, and that 16 congressional hearings on this, numerous sort of studies and investigations. Numerous military experts have gone on the record explaining in detail this was our response. This was why we didn't send people. This is we tried to we got people as close as Tripoli. It's all of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing that I found fantastic is that a lot of this comes down to like right-wing machinations about what the military is capable of doing, like it's 24 or Homeland or something that they can.
And his name escapes me now, but we had a very senior-ranking military expert testify before Congress, and I'm sorry, it might have even been former Defense Chairman Gates saying, this is almost a comical, misunderstanding of how the military operates. This might look good on TV, but this is not how it works. And also, by the way, the military learned something from Black Hawk Down. They learned something about sending in, all of those troops into an urban, chaotic, violent area where they didn't know what was going on. Since they lost all those people at Black Hawk Down in Somalia, they have made calculations about what they do and don't do. And this, clearly to me, is an example of they don't send in. And Leon Panetta has talked about this, and others have talked about this. We don't send people into situations where we don't have enough details because it's not safe, et cetera, et cetera.
No, and if the president had...
Right, but the point is, there's only lingering questions if you just ignore all the answers that have been given. And that was CBS's first mistake, is to sort of wade into this.
Well, I mean, their first mistake,
with the rhetoric.
Part of this, and I can't help but avoid it, I mean, they can't help but see it as, this book was published, this guy's book was published by a book publisher that is owned by CBS, by the right-wing outlet there. And there's this great piece from Joe Strupp up on MediaMatters.org about how the book publishing industry's dirty secret is that these books don't get fact-checked.
Yeah, and this one in particular is just a complete joke. Mother Jones had a good piece this week. If you read the book, if you were able to read it before it got withdrawn, it's almost comically unbelievable. And CBS pointed to this book as, this was one of the things that convinced them that the witness was reliable. They can put him on. They can make him the center.
He has a book that we gave him. Of course, he's reliable.
And Mother Jones had some of these passages, and it's like bad TV writing. It's like bad everything writing.
Right.
And you're like, anyone who just reads like 4 paragraphs. And I've talked to people in the publishing industry. And when this book came up, they looked at it and they're like, this is crap. I mean,
right.
Yes, we want a Benghazi book. We're not going to bid on this. Come on. So it was known within the publishing business that this was a joke book. And, of course,
Mary it's from Threshold. It's Mary Matlin's publishing.
Yeah, of course she bought it. And that's what they do. But for CBS, this supposedly proud, rich tradition of journalism, to point to this book and say, oh, well, it's in the book. Let's put it on TV. Oh, and by the way, no, CBS did not tell their viewers that there was a conflict of interest and that their report was likely hyped sales of the book, which is also owned by CBS. So again, this is like the train wreck of all train wrecks.
Well, and
CBS still is just hunkered down, and they're going to try to weather this out.
Well, and Eric Boehlert, we would thank you and all the folks at Media Matters for staying on top of this. I can't help but think that CBS never would have been held accountable if it were not for Media Matters. We Act Radio's got a petition up on its Facebook page, facebook.com/WeActRadio, calling for Jeff Fager to be dismissed. So folks can go over there and sign that petition. Eric Boehlert, Senior Fellow at Media Matters for America, thanks for joining us.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All righty. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we will be right back after this.
Say you want to go.
Yeah,
a Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course.
Really?
Indiana University East. Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away.
Education beyond high school. A path to opportunity and success for our young people. The key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream. Because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
When you go on a road trip, you're careful. You follow the signs to arrive at the right place. It's the same online. Read the internet signs along the way, or you may be led astray. For example, look for the .gov at the end of the web address. If it isn't .gov, it isn't the real Social Security website. People are often victimized by misleading advertisers who use terms like Social Security or Medicare to trick the public. These companies charge a fee for free Social Security services. These services include changing your name and getting a new Social Security card. There's no need to pay for services Social Security offers for free. Go to www.socialsecurity.gov. And remember, if it isn't .gov, it isn't Social Security.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. All weekend, I'm Karl Frisch. Joining us now to talk about Obamacare and the update with the latest on the Affordable Care Act is Igor Volsky from Think Progress. Igor, thanks for joining us. Are you there, Igor?
Hey, Carl, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. You know, it's been a tough week, but we're all kind of hanging in there.
Still got the music playing in the background for some reason. But, one thing that you wrote this week was a good piece that kind of broke down the enrollment numbers for the Affordable Care Act in something a lot more easily obtainable than these, overly dramatic news stories about how few the number of people are that signed up. I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then I also wanted to, fast forward to the end of the week when we were talking about ways to fix the issue with people being kicked out of their junk insurance policies.
Yes, so a busy week certainly for Obamacare with the first official numbers finally out. The administration has been trying to kind of lower expectations for some time, just given all the website glitches, and it turns out that about 100,000 people signed up for healthcare through the exchanges, through healthcare.gov and through state exchanges, and another about 300,000 are eligible for Medicaid and the CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. And overall, they're fairly, they're lower than projected. They're lower than the administration anticipated.
Now, is that 100,000, they've made it all the way through the sign-up process?
Yes, all the way through the process. They've picked their plan already. They may or may not have yet paid for it.
Well, I mean, and I'm probably just shy of that. I mean, there have been problems with the website, and I, for one, have been trying to sign up for Obamacare and decided to wait until the 1st of December to try again, so they'd have plenty of time to fix the website. But there's got to be a large number of people out there who have looked at plans but not chosen something yet.
Yeah, it sounds like you're part of the about 800,000 people the administration estimates have gotten all the way through the process but are just short of choosing the specific plan they want to enroll in. And of course, the hope is that, as you point out, once they fix the system, you're going to convert all those 800,000 people into actual sign-ups.
But, if there's really only one good corollary for comparison with this, and that's probably Romneycare up in Massachusetts. What kind of sign-up numbers were we looking at with that plan when it was put into effect? Because essentially, for folks that don't know, Romneycare was essentially a state exchange for private insurance companies set up when Mitt Romney was governor years ago. How long did it take for people to start signing up for that? Because it's remarkably successful now.
Yeah, it took quite a while, and that's a good point to make. They only had about 123 people sign up in the very first month. It grew from that, which is certainly the hope also with Obamacare. Signing people up for health care is difficult when everything goes right, when there's bipartisan support for reform.
Right, and when the Heritage Foundation is appearing at events to launch Romneycare and praising it.
Precisely. So if there are lessons from Massachusetts, it's that this is going to be a long process. It's going to take time. And we also know that in Massachusetts, people logged on to the website or called a call center and checked out all the options an average of 18 times before actually deciding to sign up. So on the whole, these first numbers that we're seeing from the first month of enrollment don't tell us a whole lot. It's going to be after a couple of months, maybe after the open enrollment period ends on March 31st, that we're really going to see the full picture.
So how does it work after the open enrollment period? Do people have to wait until the following year to sign up for something in the exchange?
Well, if you go uninsured through the entire open enrollment period, then you can buy insurance again beginning the next period starts in October. From October, I believe, to December. It's a lot shorter than this first initial 6-month period. But with this kind of first juncture, in order to start actually receiving coverage in January, on January 1st, you have to sign up on December 15th. If you sign up after that, then the coverage will start the following month.
So let's say that you have insurance through your employer and you lose your job in April. Do you have to wait until October to get insurance?
There might be provisions allowing for some kind of bridge. I'm not precisely sure how that would work, but I would be surprised if there wasn't any kind of allowance for that.
So we've got like a minute and 30 left. The rest of this week has been consumed with the need to fix it so that people won't be thrown off their junk insurance policies, and Republicans really trying to make it so that insurance companies can continue to sell these junk policies. Tell us about that.
This is the political problem the administration finds itself in. You have people who are losing coverage, but the exchanges in the website don't really work, so they can't easily sign up for care. And so you have a whole lot of Democrats who are receiving these calls from their constituents saying, the president said I could keep my policy, why can't I? And you have legislative efforts on both sides of the aisle trying to allow people to stay in their current plans. You know, at the end of the day, it's not very good policy because it doesn't get people into the better coverage, which is what ACA wants, but it is good politics for vulnerable lawmakers.
So hopefully we'll get those things straightened out. I mean, you know, my gut has told me from the very beginning, and we'll have to go in just a second, that this, you know, as people begin to sign up and get the care through the Affordable Care Act, that a lot of these attacks are going to have to fall by the wayside when people realize that it's private insurance and that they're going to get the care they need. Igor Volsky from Think Progress, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be back in the next hour.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM, broadcasting live from Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in D.C.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Postal Service is making one of the most substantial changes in years, expanding to Sunday parcel delivery. Jesse Russell reports.
The Postal Service is undergoing a significant change as it moves towards Sunday parcel delivery. The announcement comes after months of debate on Capitol Hill regarding postal reform, which included not expanding but contracting delivery by eliminating Saturday service. The program will start with Sunday delivery of Amazon.com packages and is launching in Los Angeles County and New York City. John Beaumont is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers.
We've just hired recently approximately 35,000 career carrier assistants. Now, these are new employees. They will become career after they've been in the service for a little over 2 years after someone retires. And as they come in, these jobs, especially the Sunday jobs, a lot of them are going to the career carrier assistants. Of these career carrier assistants, almost 25% of them are United States veterans coming back from the Middle East.
He said the addition of Sunday delivery will give the Postal Service an advantage over UPS and FedEx.
Amazon.com tried to work with some of the other companies, and they didn't have the network to go ahead and handle this and get it out. So it's not like this service was offered exclusively to the post office. It actually was, I understand it was either actually to FedEx or UPS first, and our network was actually able to handle it better to get out there.
Hundreds of taxi drivers in the Teamster-affiliated Washington, D.C. Taxi Operators Association are accusing the D.C. Taxicab Commission of stifling speech. The commission required written testimony in advance because some commissioners say it's hard for them to understand some people with accents. The union cab drivers say that explanation is abhorrent, discriminatory, and unlawful. The union taxi drivers were at the meeting to protest what they say is unfair towing and ticketing of cabs. The union wants D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray to direct the commission to immediately halt its practice of requiring written testimony in advance. 3 Democratic U.S. senators and 3 Democratic U.S. representatives have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act of 2013. Senator Tammy Baldwin says the act protects the constitutional reproductive rights of women to make their own private health decisions. Baldwin says it will, quote, protect a woman's right to safe and legal reproductive health services by stopping restrictive regulations and laws, such as those in place in states including Texas and Wisconsin, intended to curtail reproductive health services for women, end quote. I'm Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Since 2002, Workers Independent News has put worker voices and issues on hundreds of radio stations. But unless we raise enough money very quickly, that ends November 15th. So please go to laborradio.org and click Donate Now to save WIN. Madison, Wisconsin-based Workers Independent News was in the thick of the 2011 Wisconsin worker uprising that inspired the world. Inspire us now by saving Workers Independent News. LaborRadio.org and click Donate. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit LaborRadio.org.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, just listening to this commercial won't help them. Just listening won't give them their next meal, or shelter, or hope. You can help by texting GIVE to 777-444 to donate $10 and by going to usaid.gov/FWD to forward the facts. Brought to you by the Ad Council and USAID. Text donations go directly to Consortium of Humanitarian Relief Organizations. Standard text and data rates apply.
If you doubt that big money and lies can pervert elections, look at Initiative 522 in Washington State. It had been put on the ballot by a grassroots coalition of consumers, organic producers, environmentalists, and others who want honesty in food labeling. The initiative would have required grocery manufacturers that slip genetically manipulated organisms into their products to state that fact on their food labels. But the industry ran a dishonest multi-million-dollar PR campaign, including ads to scare voters by falsely claiming that the truth in labeling provision would jack up each family's annual food costs by an average of more than $450. Especially dishonest and likely illegal was the industry's crude attempt to keep voters from knowing who was funding the attack ads. A front group, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, set up a dummy campaign account called Defense of Brand, which really was a hide-the-brand artifice. It let big-name food giants put some $11 million into the no-labeling campaign without revealing their participation and angering consumers. But the state attorney general exposed this dodge and forced the giants to fess up. Behind this hoax within another hoax were such names as Campbell Soup, Coke, Nestle, and Pepsi. With their money and deceptions, they prevailed in the vote, but that same combo of cash and lies also infuriated millions of consumers and others across the country who seek nothing more than a basic level of corporate integrity and a minimal level of control over the food they bring into their homes. This is Jim Hightower saying, the GMO profiteers can run, but finally they won't be able to hide from the growing number of Americans who are on to them and literally are fed up with their tactics. GMO labeling laws are currently being pushed in some 20 other states. The fun is just beginning.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Karl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Welcome back to Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. You can find more about me at karlfrisch.com, where you can sign up for my email list and also follow me at Karl Frisch, KarlFrisch, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and every other kind of social media that you can possibly imagine. Don't forget to connect with the show at takeactionnews.com. In September, the Canadian energy company Lone Pine filed a $250 million lawsuit against the Canadian government, disputing the legality of Quebec's fracking ban on the St. Lawrence River. The ban prevents Lone Pine from making good on its permit for exploration under the river, putting an estimated 3.3 billion cubic feet of highly lucrative undiscovered shale out of reach. However, because this company is chartered in Delaware, the suit is being adjudicated in an investor tribunal established under the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Joining me now to discuss the implications of this and other free trade agreements on environmental regulations is our good friend from In These Times, Cole Strangler. Cole, thanks for joining us.
Great to be back, Carl.
Alrighty, so I get from reading your piece that we should be very worried that this thing is being heard out in some kind of, secret business tribunal in NAFTA instead of maybe a courtroom. Tell us how this works out.
So you have a lot of these bilateral investment treaties and trade agreements that permit investors to sue states in foreign tribunals for a number of different reasons. Now, one of the most vague ones is the quote-unquote minimum standard of treatment. So companies can use this to argue against any sort of action that states will take that violate some kind of the business climate that was there before they signed the agreement. And there's also provisions in NAFTA that prohibit indirect expropriations, and that's another claim that Lone Pine is making. Now, the interesting part about this is that even under NAFTA, there are exceptions to that rule about indirect expropriations if the action is done for a, quote, public purpose. And Lone Pine is also disputing that the public purpose clause applies there.
And what justification would they have for disputing that?
I mean, it's actually really interesting. I was on the phone with Lone Pine's lawyer, who comes from one of these high-powered law firms that specializes in these kinds of cases. He's one of the, and that's another story in itself, that you have these, few high-powered lawyers who will rotate between litigating and also serving on these tribunals that decide the case. So that's a whole different story. But basically, the argument is that, I can go in, it's a little complex, but you'll realize the logic doesn't actually hold up. But so the argument is that there is actually a moratorium in Quebec that the province is trying to study the effects of fracking for obvious reasons. People are upset about it. The scientific consensus isn't yet clear on whether it's healthy. So
they enjoy non-flammable water.
All that stuff. Yeah. So Quebec decided that they were going to limit fracking temporarily while they completed this environmental assessment. So that's province-wide. There's this moratorium on gas drilling. Separate to that, but part of the same concern, there was a specific ban that was passed just that applies to the river. So you have this temporary moratorium across the province, which is to study the effects, and then you have this ban specifically on the river, because the river is seen as, a clear case of, you don't want fracking.
Well, it's much more easy to contaminate.
Right. And so if you talk to the company's lawyer, they'll say, well, the moratorium itself, we don't have a problem with that. That's a separate issue. What we're talking about is this unfair ban on fracking that only takes place in the river that, if the minister herself said that it was for political reasons and not environmental reasons. And they quote this hearing in Quebec's parliament where the minister says that it's for political reasons. I should also point out that she says that the first reason is because the concerns that people are raising, the environmental concerns, but she also acknowledges that this is a political, in part political. So that's the argument. It doesn't really hold up, but that's the argument, is that this is a political decision, and that's separate from the ban on the moratorium on fracking province-wide. So it's a weird kind of logic. But
well, I mean, it's also odd that they would say that a political decision can't be based in public health. I mean, the notion that somebody wouldn't find a need to be politically active or concerned when their land quality, their land value, their groundwater is all at stake.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what I found myself thinking as well. But there's a certain logic that I guess international trade lawyers have to operate under in order to win the case. So,
So where do you see this thing going then?
People don't really know. It's impossible to say what is actually going to happen in this case. These cases take a long, amount of time to end up settling. The interesting part about this, and I touch on this in the piece as well, and this is why environmentalists and consumer advocates are concerned about this case, is because usually, you have these trade agreements that allow these kind of cases to happen. In most cases, it's usually Western companies that are suing developing countries' governments. And so you see this with the Chevron case is kind of a good example of that, Chevron against Ecuador. And you see these cases where mining companies in the West are preying on developing countries for establishing regulations. And that's sort of how most of the mining cases wind up. They're usually those kind of cases. The distinction here is that you actually have the country of a economic powerhouse, the government being sued. And so people are concerned that as we sign more trade agreements, so particularly the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which includes a number of different really capital exporting countries, really powerful economies, and then also you look at the trade agreement we're signing with Europe. People see that these kinds of cases, this could become the new norm, where you have as long as you have a subsidiary that's chartered somewhere else. So let's say there's a company that's in Europe, or a company in the United States, as opposed to, let's say, a fracking ban in New York State, for instance. Usually, that's the law. You can't do anything about it. If we sign the trade agreement with Europe that includes these kind of investor protections, theoretically, you could have the company subsidiary based in, France, suing the U.S. government for violating the trade agreement, which is...
Well, and, I look at what the political climate is in Canada as we speak. I mean, it's a fairly liberal society, but a lot of right-wing money has been flowing north of the border into Canada to build a conservative framework similar to what was built or started being built in the United States 40 years ago. A lot of money being put into conservative media, a lot of money being put into the religious right in Canada, a lot of money being put into the same kinds of organizations that were established decades ago here to build a more corporately friendly political environment there.
Right, and I think it probably has a lot to do with the energy exploitation that's taking place right now. You look at the tar sands, now fracking, natural gas exploitation. So the Canadian government right now is very friendly to energy interests, those big interests.
So, you mentioned there's obviously this case. I mean, we've got like a minute and a half left. How likely do you think it is that, I think that maybe Americans would probably be much more up in arms if the situation were reversed? I mean, can you imagine the kind of attacks right-wingers would have if some other country were trying to exert its power over us?
No, I mean, yeah, and actually, it's a good point you mentioned, because this is
usually it's the UN is coming to get us.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is one of the reasons why you have a lot of right-wingers actually that are opposed to the TPP, is because they don't see it the way that we do about concern about environment or public health.
Right.
But it's an attack on national sovereignty. So that's why you have somebody like Michelle Bachmann coming out in opposition to the trade agreement, because people like her see this as an attack on sovereignty.
Well, and I would say strange bedfellows, but that's something that she's quite used to at this point with Marcus. Our good friend Cole Stangler, thanks a lot for joining us in these times. Go and check out this story. It's a great read, and you really need to get up to date on this issue. Go to inthesetimes.com and look for anything that Cole's written, but this in particular. Cole, thanks for joining us. Alrighty. When we come back, we are going to be chatting with Chris Hamby from the Center of Public Integrity about black lung disease. And as a ex-smoker, I have to tell you want to stick around because it's going to be a great conversation. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be right back.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in modifying free consultations at 2%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-9950 or visit HUD.gov/prevent loan scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/Guard Reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Friends, David Shuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the ARC. The ARC is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The ARC is also home to the ARC Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the ARC, so stop by and see them. The ARC, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the ARC's website, www.thearcdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The ARC, part of Southeast D.C. We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org. Or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. All weekend, I'm Karl Frisch. So, as of today, I have been a non-smoker for 165 days, 1 hour and 51 minutes. That's as of the recording of this show. And one of the things that I've been positively obsessed with since I quit smoking is lung health. And in all its shapes and sizes, or all the iterations of the issue. And, you know, it had been at least 15 years since Gary Fox noticed signs of black lung disease. It started with shortness of breath, then a cough that yielded black mucus. By 1999, his symptoms convinced him to apply for federal benefits. A doctor certified by the U.S. Department of Labor examined him and diagnosed the most severe form of the disease, known as complicated coal-workers' pneumocystis. The government ordered his employer, a subsidiary of the behemoth Massey Energy Company, to begin paying him monthly benefits. But, as is almost always the case, the company appealed. Here to talk with me now is Chris Hamby, a reporter for the Center for Public Integrity, who collaborated with ABC News on a year-long investigation into the coal industry's handling of black lung claims. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So, when the coal industry appeals these types of decisions, how often are they successful in winning their appeals?
Well, we don't have good data on that, how often they win on appeal, but we know that at the initial level, the victory rate for miners is about 14% in the 2012 fiscal year, and that was actually up from what it has been in years.
Meaning that the industry is successful in 86% of the cases?
That's right. And then of those 14% that they win, very often, most if not all the time, they will be appealed by the coal company and they will go to an administrative law judge, and that's when a lot of the evidence is really developed, and the coal company can enlist all these their experts and really litigate this a lot. And we don't have the numbers on that. The DOL does not keep that information.
So what is their defense then? What do they say? That they're not responsible for black lung, that it just spontaneously happens in these people?
Well, if you're going to make a black lung claim, you have to prove, one, that you have black lung, two, that it was caused by your work in the mines, three, that you're totally disabled, and four, that you're totally disabled because of your black lung. So you can attack them on any one of those 4 points, and lawyers are very successful in doing that for coal companies. And what a lot of times happens is they're able to concede that a miner may have black lung, but they're not totally disabled by it. Or they're totally disabled, but the real cause is smoking or something else.
So tell us about the case of Gary Fox then. How did his case play out?
Right. His case was a particularly striking example because what happened with him is that he, like many miners, was not able to find a lawyer because lawyers just sort of fled this area because the payoff is not very big and your chances of winning are not very good, and you're not allowed to charge anything until the case is finally over, and then you have to fight the coal company for your fees. So Gary and his wife were taking on a subsidiary of Massey Energy by themselves, and specifically a lawyer at this major, probably the preeminent defense firm for federal black lung cases known as Jackson Kelly. And what had happened to him was that he presented evidence, like most miners, from his treatment records and from his exam that's sponsored by the Labor Department, which the Labor Department pays for, and you can select from a list of doctors that they've approved. Now, Massey and Jackson Kelly, working for them, went out and obtained other medical opinions, and among those other medical opinions that they obtained were Gary Fox had, 2 years before he filed benefits, had a lung procedure where he had part of his lung removed, and they were just trying to rule out cancer. There was no indication that the doctors were looking for black lung or even knew that he was a coal miner. But Jackson Kelly ended up getting the slides of those tissues and sending them to two of their expert pathologists who are typically support their case. And those two pathologists both wrote reports saying that the tissue was consistent with complicated black lung, which would automatically qualify Gary.
And folks should know, I mean, oftentimes industry has a group of people or even these, for hire entities that sound like official sounding independent organizations that they will constantly send these types of things to, knowing that they're going to get the results they want.
And there is definitely a reliable stable that they have.
But in this case, they didn't get what they wanted.
They did not get the result that they were hoping for with the results, and it would it would have been very, very difficult for them to win the case with those results in the records, so they simply withheld them. And instead sort of built their case around the hospital pathologist report, which was really just meant to rule out cancer and didn't really address the issue of black lung at all. But it was clear from the judge's decision and from all the other doctors in the case that was taken as the key piece of evidence in defeating the claim. And as a result, Gary Fox had to go back to work for more than 5 more years. And by the time he was finally able to get out, he was so sick that he needed a lung transplant, and he died waiting on that transplant.
Well, how did we ultimately find out that these slides had been investigated and that they'd been withheld from the judge and Gary Fox's team?
This only came out because Gary in 2007 when he'd filed his second claim in late 2006, and in early 2007, he was able to get in touch with, just by chance, this lawyer who works out of his home in rural southern West Virginia, but who has experience going up against Jackson Kelly and knows the sort of some of their practices of withholding evidence in some of these cases, and was immediately suspicious of this case, and so really pushed for the firm to have to turn over any information it was withholding, and it was a lengthy fight. The firm filed numerous appeals to try and stop this as the case was ongoing, and they conceded the case to try and prevent discovery of these materials, but ultimately they had to turn over those two reports that were generated 8 years earlier, and they showed that there was strong evidence all along that he had the most severe form of black lung, and he finally won his case, and then a few months later he died.
Well, is this why the one judge called it a long-standing pattern of misconduct on the part of Jackson Kelly?
Well, we don't know exactly what the judge was commenting on in that email that I got, but what the article goes through is that, yes, this does appear to be a pattern by the firm over a period of time, and that's documented in cases dating back to the early 90s or even earlier. And it should be noted that the firm has never said that they don't do this. Their argument is simply that there's nothing wrong with doing this. And that's the argument that they're pursuing to this day in front of a federal circuit court of appeals.
Absolutely fascinating. Chris Hamby, staff writer at the Center for Public Integrity. You can read his report at publicintegrity.org. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
All righty. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and coming up, we're going to be talking to Heather Cronk about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act and some of the big news in the fight for full equality and simple human dignity for the LGBT community that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We'll be back after this.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. So, the U.S. Senate this week passed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act with 64 votes in favor and only 32 votes against. That includes all of the Senate Democrats and 10 Senate Republicans. Joining us now to talk about this, some of the other successes that the LGBT community has had over the last couple weeks, is our good friend from Get Equal, Heather Cronk. Heather, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Karl. Thanks for having me.
All right. So before we get into the good, I want to get into the bad. Because, a lot of our allies in the straight world have no idea some of the things that LGBT people face. We're fighting for marriage equality, so they assume that we can't get fired simply because of who we love, or that we can't be denied a rental apartment or a lease on an office space because of who we love. But just so people have the facts handy, gay people like me can only get legally married right now in 14 states and Washington, D.C., but very soon 16 states. Gay people like me can be fired in 29 states based simply on who I love and not for the quality of their work. On that score, the number of states sanctioning discrimination is even worse for transgender people. They are only protected in 17 states. Stable, law-abiding same-sex couples in 32 states are forbidden from jointly adopting children and denied the right to adopt the sons and daughters of their partner in an equally unfortunate number of states. Students who identify or are perceived as LGBT remain vulnerable to state-sanctioned discrimination by their teachers and public schools in 36 states. While 33 members of our quote-unquote more perfect union have no statewide programs protecting them from bullying. When it comes to renting a home, people like me can be denied a lease simply for being gay in 29 states, and again, the numbers are even worse for the transgender community. While hospitals accepting Medicare and Medicaid are currently barred from denying visitation to same-sex partners as a result of a mandate issued by President Obama, 26 states have no laws guaranteeing such simple human dignity should the edict ever be rescinded by a future president. And as we know, some hospitals don't follow those rules anyways. So, Heather, here we are, and the Senate passes the Employment Non-Discrimination Act by a rather large margin, but not without some controversy. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we were really excited to see the Senate finally take up and pass this bill, which is actually the first time that they voted on this bill since 1996. So the last time the Senate took action on this bill, Macarena was the number one hit single on the radio, which that should tell you something. So we were excited to see them take it up. But the problem with the version of the bill that they passed is that distinct from other pieces of civil rights legislation, like the Civil Rights Act, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, this piece of legislation, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, actually has far broader religious exemptions than I've ever seen in a piece of civil rights legislation before. So we were excited to see, forward movement from the Senate. Get Equal is really concerned about the kind of precedent that sets. And basically the assertion that the Senate was making that not just religious institutions like churches and synagogues, but religiously affiliated institutions like hospitals and universities actually have exemption from the law. So, the Senate passed a bill that said actually it's cool for universities and hospitals to still continue to discriminate.
So it's kind of a half a step forward and a half a step back.
That's right. And the other thing that it does, that the religious exemptions does as a precedent, is also hurt our friends and allies in the reproductive justice movement who have been fighting these same kinds of religious exemptions for years.
Well, it's not.
We're
It's
currently seeing that play out in the court system.
Perhaps even further than that, it also hurts the marriage equality fight.
Absolutely.
When you consider that folks are trying for all kinds of exemptions there. And to what point does it end if people are going to have these religious conscious disputes? Could somebody who has an STD or whatever be denied treatment by a hospital or whatever? I mean, at a certain point, if we know that the House is not going to be voting on this anytime soon, didn't we have an opportunity to get the legislation right and passed in the Senate?
I think that's absolutely right. And the really frustrating part of that is that Democrats went in with this version of the bill. This wasn't the compromise. This was the starting point. And so, our pushback on the religious exemptions was partially a content pushback, right? We wanted to make sure that, media was paying attention to this and that the LGBT community was paying attention to this and really kind of look at the content of the bill. But it's also a problem with precedent that, now we're looking at, ways that, the radical right, the radical religious right, can actually then use this as precedent in much more far-reaching, bills and efforts to kind of solidify discrimination into law. For me, it's particularly poignant to be looking at a bill that writes discrimination into a non-discrimination bill.
Right. So meanwhile, you've got people like Speaker Boehner saying that the legislation is unheard of because it's so vague and makes it possible for people to sue, which is the whole point. But at the same time, it's unprecedented because, like you said, it provides for an avenue of discrimination in a piece of anti-discrimination law. When people were fighting the civil rights pushes in the 50s and 60s, they often made religious claims to advance their bigoted opinions. And religious folks were not granted any sort of out on religious grounds when it came to discrimination against people of color, were they?
Well, and that was actually the most striking thing as part of this conversation, that Julian Bond, the former head of the NAACP
Right.
and a civil rights warrior, wrote an op-ed in the Politico, back a couple of months ago, saying exactly that, saying these religious exemptions are the exact same religious exemptions that folks were trying to write into the Civil Rights Act in 64 and in 74, and we resisted them every time. And we should do the same thing in this bill. And I found that, particularly moving.
Okay, so let's move on to sunnier topics. There has been good news. You have the state of Illinois and the state of Hawaii both passing marriage equality through their legislatures and on to the governor. Hard-fought wins, right?
Well, those are especially hard-fought wins. I mean, Illinois came down to, the skin of their teeth. And Hawaii has actually been fighting this fight for 20 years.
Well, they were
Hawaii was
the first
state to take this up. And there have been folks, organizers on the ground for the last 2 decades, trying to not just win this fight. It's not just about winning the fight, but they've been working for 2 decades to have the same dignity and respect that their neighbors do. And my heart went out to all those folks who I know have been working for a really long time on that.
Well, and, for folks that don't know, 20 years ago, the Hawaii Supreme Court basically said you can't treat people differently. And the way that the state dealt with it was by passing a state initiative that basically said that the legislature could decide who gets to be married. Now, that's exactly what the legislature did decide in this legislation. But of course, right-wingers tried to take it to court saying, no, what the initiative actually meant was that they can only allow marriages between one man and one woman. But they were just laughed out of court, right?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I remember actually, I grew up in the South and I went to college in the South, and I remember talking about this in one of my English classes in college in the South, and it blew my mind. I mean, Hawaii was really on the front edge of this, and that was really my introduction into what culture wars look like.
Well, and, I keep on telling people, if you're my generation, 35 years old, the idea that you would one day be able to get married is so bizarre, because it didn't enter my consciousness until the case in Hawaii either. But then even when it did enter my consciousness, it was kind of like a peripheral thing, like, yeah, okay, buddy. Yeah, we'll be able to get married someday.
Yeah, and kudos to the folks who have been, fighting this for even longer than 20 years. I mean, the folks at Lambda Legal, the folks at Marriage Equality USA have been doing this grassroots work for decades.
Well, and there was a case out of Minnesota in 1973.
That's right. And, I think that speaks to not just the powerful narrative of recognizing love and not just government recognition of love, but, your neighbor and your family and your church, all of those pieces of the community coming together and validating a relationship, I think is just so powerful.
Well, and once the law goes into effect in Hawaii, once the law goes into effect in Illinois, some 38% of Americans will live in a state where marriage equality is the law of the land. And now in Missouri, we have to go in just a minute, but in Missouri, the governor, Jay Nixon, has said that the state will begin to recognize same-sex marriages performed in other jurisdictions for the purposes of state income tax since ENDA has been struck, or since DOMA has been struck down. That's also big news. So we're getting to the point where culturally we've hit a tipping point, and things are going to be changing very quickly for some time.
And it's actually the Missouri ruling is, talk about how this really impacts people. One of our friends and fellow organizers, Jimmy Grunder, and his partner, Paul Roark, just moved to Missouri about a year ago. They're literally getting married today, and that news came out yesterday. They went to Iowa to get married. They're going back to Missouri. This is going to change their lives.
All righty. So I think if anybody's listening out there, that they now know that marriage equality is moving forward yet again. The National Organization for Marriage is on its heels, but there's still a great deal of work to be done. Just to emphasize the point, gay and lesbian and bisexual people, or people that are even perceived to be lesbian, gay, or bisexual, can be fired in 29 states simply because of who they are or who they are perceived to be. Trans people can be fired are only protected from being fired in 17 states in this country. So we've got a lot of work to do. And hopefully, when we have a more amenable House of Representatives, we'll be able to get a clean ENDA bill through. Heather Kronk with the great folks at Get Equal, thanks for joining us. And where can people visit you all online?
Yeah, you can see us on our website at getequal.org. We're also on Facebook at Get Equal and Twitter at Get Equal. So definitely stop by and get involved.
Alrighty. Thanks a lot, Heather. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Education beyond high school. A path to opportunity and success for our young people. And the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream. Because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. You have federal student aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal student aid. Start here, go further.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Marins, and I'm here to talk to you about Take Action News with David Shuster. Every week we talk politics, government, and what you can do to take action. David Shuster talks with today's leading political minds.
Valerie, so many people will know your name, know your story because of those dastardly actions by the Bush administration to try to discredit your husband, who called them out for their lies that led up to the Iraq War. And in so going after him, they leaked your name. 10 years since the start of the Iraq War. Has your perspective on any of this changed? Do you still carry around any sort of anger or frustration to the Bush administration? How have you been dealing with it all these years?
Until the right is able to come to terms with the reality that we were lied into this war and it was not a good idea and it wasn't to liberate the Iraqi people, they will just continue to live in, la-la land and perpetuate the lies that got us into the war in the first place.
Tune in from noon to 3 p.m. every Saturday, right here on We Act Radio.
When our daughter Ava was 4, we noticed she didn't talk much. A genetic test revealed that she had hearing loss caused by 2 mutated genes. One she inherited from myself, the other from her dad. If it weren't for the amazing people at U of M, we might have never known the true cause of Ava's hearing loss or how to properly treat it.
The University of Michigan C.S. Mott Children's Hospital is one of only a handful of hospitals in the world researching genetic hearing loss in addition to treating it. Our breakthrough research and advanced treatments combined with outstanding care help us change children's lives in extraordinary ways. For the leaders and best in pediatric care, call a Mott Patient Advisor at 877-475-MOTT or visit mottchildren.org.
She is more talkative now and more social. She loves music now. She's humming to the music, and it's sweet to actually hear her humming.
To learn more, call 877-475-MOTT.
They not only helped us find answers, they helped Ava find her voice.
That's the Michigan difference.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. Karl Frisch here. Last week, Super Typhoon Haiyan, I think I've pronounced that wrong for going on a week now, ravaged the Philippines, leaving at least 3,000 dead and millions homeless. While aid workers are still assessing the extent of the damage, we know that this is one of the most intense landfalling storms ever recorded. While it was wreaking havoc on this country, the young Filipino diplomat Nadarev Sano was traveling to the UN climate conference in Warsaw, Poland. In an emotional speech, he urged global action on climate change.
I speak for my delegation, but I speak for the countless people who will no longer be able to speak for themselves after perishing from the storm. I speak also for those who have been orphaned by the storm. I speak for those the people now raising this time to save survivors and alleviate the suffering of the people affected. We can take drastic action now to ensure that we prevent a future where super typhoons become a way of life. Can we ever attain the ultimate objective of the convention, which is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system? By failing to meet the objective of the convention, we may have ratified our own doom. We have to confront the issue of loss and damage. Loss and damage is a reality today across the world.
Joining us now to discuss the increasingly apparent link between climate change and severe weather, severe climate, is Chris Mooney, host of Climate Desk Live and the New York Times bestselling author of The Republican War on Science, and also his latest book, The Republican Brain. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Carl. Hi.
Hey, so talk to us about this. I mean, is there a scientific consensus that climate change is having an impact on severe weather conditions?
It depends on the exact weather phenomenon. In general, climate change does worsen weather extremes. When we're talking about hurricanes, tropical cyclones, typhoons, they're actually all the same thing. They're actually still debating this, but when you see an event like this, you really just shake your head and you say, okay, I know you guys are still debating it, but I mean, come on. This looks like it might be the strongest storm ever recorded in the Northwest Pacific region, and that's the region that has the strongest storms anywhere. So 170 knots, as they say in the hurricane community, which is 195 mile per hour winds, doesn't look like there's anything in the databases to match that. So
well, and you say in your article that this super typhoon might have set a precedent for a Category 6 hurricane. How are the categories measured?
Well, they measure them by knots, and I forget that knots is nautical miles, and there's a quick equation you do to translate it to miles per hour. So basically, there's 5 categories. I forget exactly where the wind cutoffs are, but the beginning of Category 5 is 33 knots below where this was. So
wow.
You could easily imagine just creating a Category 6, and it might make some sense because there is a serious difference between Heian and a relatively weak Category 5. It is a very different atmospheric phenomenon.
Well, and there's still some debate, as you said, but how do those who believe that these, weather conditions are heightened by climate change, how do folks get to that determination? How are these kinds of events fostered by climate change?
Sure. Well, first let's go with what's absolutely indisputable, and let's go to what's maybe more disputable.
Sure.
So with an event like this, what the most dangerous part of a hurricane is what's called the storm surge, and it pushes a wall of water towards land, and that's where a lot of the deaths occur. That's where the tragedy lies in many cases, including this one. We know that climate change is causing sea level rise. There's no doubt about it. So that means that all these storm surges can penetrate further inland. And that's part of the impact. Climate change is actually part of the destruction directly through sea level rise. Then the question is, and this is less certain, is the average storm stronger anyway? And there's a huge debate going on. There's a recently published paper, a scientific paper, that says that there's more Category 4s and 5s now and less Category 1s and 2s. Than there used to be, and that the paper directly ties that to climate change. There are still scientists, I have to be fair and say there are still scientists who are debating whether they agree with that.
So while it may not be, the severity of these storms may not be worse, the outcomes of these storms is worse, which isn't disputable, simply because water levels are rising, which means that water is going to be pushed further inland, thus obviously impacting people more directly.
Yeah. The sea level thing is indisputable. The intensification thing is theoretically sound and expected to happen because, after all, you're heating the oceans, and that's where the energy comes from.
Right.
But there's still some debate, but it makes physical sense.
Well, and here's what's interesting. With the way that you explain the severity question is how you'll hear a lot of right-wingers explain all of climate change. Purposefully misleading folks as to what a hypothesis or a theory is, what the scientific consensus is. There is no dispute that climate change is real and that it's at least partially caused by humans, right?
No, that's not really a seriously open scientific question at this point.
Well, I mean, if you're a conservative, lots of things have a liberal bias, whether it's the media, science, letters, shapes, numbers, colors. I mean, they all have a liberal bias.
Right, and I'm aware that this is not accepted, But nevertheless, I report on the scientific community what they know, what they think, and I can tell you that this is one of the very established conclusions they are very confident in. It's really, really way up there on the certainty scale.
Now, do you think that it would take something like this happening in the U.S., something like Sandy happening again and again and again before people stateside start to think that action has to be taken?
I think we know without a doubt that mega events like Haiyan, like Sandy, like Katrina, they focus attention on climate change, and sadly, it does seem to be the case that those events make people care more, and then people forget, and then not a lot happens. And so, sadly, it does seem to be the case that these events, which are tragic, are sometimes what's needed to be agenda setting.
Well, and in fairness, there's a lot of money going into the effort to make people forget about this stuff. Chris Mooney, where can people listen to your show, Climate Desk Live?
ClimateDesk.org, and there's a podcast, Inquiring Minds, where we also talk about this stuff, and that's also at ClimateDesk.org.
And people can also find it on iTunes. They should also pick up a copy of your latest book, The Republican Brain. It's a great read. Chris Mooney, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and in the next hour, we're going to be talking about some of the craziest things said by Texas Republicans this week. You'd think we could fill an entire show. Stick around. We'll be back after this.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
What happens to prosecutors who intentionally ship people to prison for 25 years even though they know the defendant is innocent?
I'm Martin Espada, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Consider Ken Anderson, the Texas former prosecutor and judge who decades ago convicted Michael Morton of murdering his wife. For 25 years, that judge and former prosecutor allowed Morton to languish in prison even though he knew he had intentionally withheld from the defense evidence that proved Morton's innocence. For 25 years. 25 years. Unlike most of these cases, here, eventually, the prosecutor was found out. It's not newsworthy that a prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence. It's the leading reason for wrongful convictions in America. But what is newsworthy is that here, something is actually going to happen to the prosecutor. In November, the judge, the former prosecutor, was sentenced to 10 days in jail for criminal contempt. 10 days compared to 25 years, and that's justice? Well, in a sense, yes. Because the answer to the question, what happens to police and prosecutors who intentionally withhold exculpatory evidence and cause innocent people to be sent to prison for decades and decades and perhaps life, generally speaking, the answer to the question, what happens to them, is nothing.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union at aclu.org, because even in the Republic of Poetry, freedom can't protect itself.
With your Working Virginia update, I'm Jesse Russell. Virginia families who rely on food assistance saw a cut in their federal benefits effective November 1st. Allison Burns reports.
Voices for Virginia's Children policy analyst Amy Woolard says that means Virginia families will see a reduction in benefits of about 5.5%, or $36 a month for a family of 4.
So with benefits only equating to about $4 per day per person, or about $1.40 per meal, that really means families and children will be struggling to make up several days' worth of meals each month heading into winter.
Woolard says most of the food stamp recipients in Virginia are children, the elderly, and disabled.
Food insecurity leads to greater risks for things like childhood obesity and other chronic conditions like asthma, anemia, pneumonia.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
Packers.
Vikings. We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown. We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full. But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live United.
So give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Postal Service is making one of the most substantial changes in years, expanding to Sunday parcel delivery. Jesse Russell reports.
The Postal Service is undergoing a significant change as it moves towards Sunday parcel delivery. The announcement comes after months of debate on Capitol Hill regarding postal reform, which included not expanding but contracting delivery by eliminating Saturday service. The program will start with Sunday delivery of Amazon.com packages and is launching in Los Angeles County and New York City. John Beaumont is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers.
We just hired recently approximately 35,000 career carrier assistants. Now, these are new employees. They will become career after they've been in the service for a little over 2 years after someone retires. And as they come in, these jobs, especially the Sunday jobs, a lot of them are going to the career carrier assistants. Of these career carrier assistants, almost 25% of them are United States veterans coming back from the Middle East.
He said the addition of Sunday delivery will give the Postal Service an advantage over UPS and FedEx.
Amazon.com tried to work with some of the other companies, and they didn't have the network to go ahead and handle this and get it out. So it's not like this service was offered exclusively to the post office. It actually was, I understand it was either actually to FedEx or UPS first, and our network was actually able to handle it better to get out there.
Hundreds of taxi drivers in the Teamster-affiliated Washington, D.C. Taxi Operators Association are accusing the D.C. Taxicab Commission of stifling speech. The commission required written testimony in advance because some commissioners say it's hard for them to understand some people with accents. The union cab drivers say that explanation is abhorrent, discriminatory, and unlawful. The union taxi drivers were at the meeting to protest what they say is unfair towing and ticketing of cabs. The union wants D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray to direct the commission to immediately halt its practice of requiring written testimony in advance. 3 Democratic U.S. senators and 3 Democratic U.S. representatives have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act of 2013. Senator Tammy Baldwin says the act protects the constitutional reproductive rights of women to make their own private health decisions. Baldwin says it will, quote, protect a woman's right to safe and legal reproductive health services by stopping restrictive regulations and laws, such as those in place in states including Texas and Wisconsin, intended to curtail reproductive health services for women, end quote. I'm Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Since 2002, Workers Independent News has put worker voices and issues on hundreds of radio stations. But unless we raise enough money very quickly, that ends November 15th. So please go to laborradio.org and click Donate Now to save WIN. Madison, Wisconsin-based Workers Independent News was in the thick of the 2011 Wisconsin worker uprising that inspired the world. Inspire us now by saving Workers Independent News. laborradio.org and click Donate. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act Radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Karl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There's work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Welcome back to Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. All weekend, more about me at karlfrisch.com, where you can sign up for my email list. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media outlets that you use. at Karl Frisch, KarlFrisch, and connect with the show at takeactionnews.com. Each week at about this time, we like to check in with our good friend Jason Stanford, the Democratic consultant and author and syndicated columnist, to get the latest in Republican crazy talk from Texas. I can tell you that I was out there this past weekend to do some investigating on my own, as Jason and I were both at a wedding of our good friend Tanya Tarr and Michael Tomlinson. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Hey, I've got the music still really loud in my ear. I don't know if we can fix that.
I think they've got it now. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
But there is never a shortage of crazy comments coming from Texas Republicans.
Oh my goodness! Like always, there's been a lot of competition.
Well, and we've got some audio I want to play for you as we kind of go through these. Let's hit Rafael Cruz talking about how atheism leads to sex abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hear that.
Relativism, where you make your rules as you go on. And then actually they've taken it to the level to say, it doesn't make any difference what you believe in as long as you're faithful to what you believe in. In other words, you make your own set of rules and then you live by your own set of rules. And of course, he said they are no absolute. When it is convenient, you change the rules. Do we know any politicians that have done that? Yes, sir. Well, we don't have to go that far, Larry. Just go to Washington.
Well, I thought
Just go to the White House. So, and of course, these leads us, when there are no moral absolutes, leads us to sexual immorality, leads us to sexual abuse, leads us to perversion, and of course, no hope. No hope.
Bonkers. So Rafael Cruz, for people at home that don't know, is Ted Cruz's crazy Tea Party dad.
Yeah, he is the 48 one of those 70s bands to Van Halen that would always open for them. I mean, he is his opening act. He's not just Ted Cruz's dad. He's his fluffer. Okay, so to say we can't really give Ted.
He's also a minister, right?
Yeah, but
a right-wing minister,
a Canadian minister. I mean, really.
Well, and what's crazy is for any minister to say that a lack of moral absolutes is what leads to sexual abuse. I'm pretty sure that there's a large amount of sexual abuse committed in churches that have lots of moral absolutes.
Funny you should mention that. Yes. I always like it when they talk about sexual immorality leading to actual criminal sexual abuse. Of course, yes. If we only have the kind of sex you want, then no kid will ever be abused again. That's exactly what they're talking about. And the Catholic Church is the greatest refutation of that stupid argument.
Well, and obviously, all you have to do is Google, and you'll find a new sex scandal coming out of a church every week, every day. But this is not the only crazy thing that Rafael Cruz has said. I mean, there are now, books could now be written with the crazy things that he has said on the stump.
There should be a Tumblr account for Rafael Cruz. In fact, he has gotten so crazy that he was leading in a hypothetical poll matchup with John Cornyn. Texas Republicans like this kind of crazy so much that they would kick John Cornyn out of the Senate and put him in the Senate.
It's fascinating. And he's probably one of the more, the nut does not fall far from the tree, apparently.
No, it does not. But I do like how he came out so strongly against freedom. That was good.
Right. Freedom is only for those who are willing to abide by the limitations that Republicans are willing to impose.
Exactly.
Louis Gohmert.
Do what we say.
Louis Gohmert, of course, is on the list again this week. It seems like he makes an appearance every week. He's upset over the president's Israel policy not being based in biblical prophecies. Let's hear that audio. It's craziness.
Some of us believe that the Bible is accurate. Certainly been so many prophecies fulfilled. And if that's true, this administration, unless they can find a verse that accurately says that those who betray Israel will be blessed, then this country is being dug a deeper hole by this administration and its betrayals of Israel's trust and Israel's friendship.
Bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. Louis Gohmert's of the variety of Republicans who want U.S. foreign policy to hasten Armageddon, right?
Right, and they do think it should be literally based on specific Bible verses, when, Carl, you and I know foreign policy should be based on 50 Shades of Grey. That's just obvious.
Louis Gohmert is particularly crazy, though. I mean, he's basically saying here that unless the president can show in the Bible where his policies are, vouched for, then he shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and actually, you know what Obama can? It's that little verse about loving your neighbor. There's that.
No, you have to ignore any time that Jesus spoke of love, or any time that Jesus talked about how it was easier for a camel to pass through the head of a needle than it was for a rich man to get into heaven.
Yeah, those were typos.
Well, they're not
typos,
so much.
Carl.
I have it on good authority that Louis Gohmert is nearly complete with the creation of the world's largest needle.
That would be very good. Yes, I think that's exactly what Congress's tax plan is: bigger needles.
Have you ever met Louis Gohmert?
No, I haven't.
I feel like I would just get stupider from standing in proximity to him.
It is a little. It's like being. I was in the same room at a party one time a year ago with the State House version of Louis Gohmert, and I felt like I was in the room with a really dangerous celebrity, sort of like a malignant Kardashian in Congress. I got a little hyperventilating a little bit. I had trouble breathing. It was very strange emotion.
I walked into Michelle Bachmann once in the hallway in one of the House office buildings, and I just lost the ability to think clearly because I was afraid that she would suck my brain out or something.
Exactly.
Like she was one of the lizard people in disguise.
Yeah, she's a succubus. That's, I think, the only explanation. I think you actually can explain her with the Bible.
Well, and it was, not to get on too much of a sidetrack, we are talking about crazy Republicans, but it was remarkably funny to this week to see her complaining about how she's losing her health care coverage and how Marcus has a pre-existing condition. Of course, it was ironic because she was not talking about his sexuality.
Right.
That's already been cured through the work of prayer at his clinic, his taxpayer-funded clinic.
What she actually meant is he has a preconditioned position on sex. I mean, that's just
right.
Different. It's an easy slip of the tongue, which also she's against.
Well, yeah, she's against slips of the tongue, and well, in fairness, so is he. All right, so then we've got Randy Weber, who is bashing the EPA regulations on so-called secret science.
Secret science, yes.
So EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy was called to testify in front of the House Science Committee this week in response to GOP allegations that the EPA uses quote-unquote secret science to justify its climate change claims. Randy Weber, attempting to poke holes in climate change science and completely missing the point, asked, "Does science ever change or get proven wrong?" McCarthy answered that it does. Tell us about this craziness.
Well, yeah, they really don't. They think we're making it up. They think that science is being twisted to prove whatever we want, and in fact, we just look at the science and go, "Oh, crap, we got to do something about this." They look at the science and go, "Oh, crap, how are we going to make money?" And so they tend to invalidate the science.
Right, they have no idea. Okay, so if a scientist has a theory, it gets tested, and then another scientist looks at that and sees if they can replicate the results. And then, in the case of climate change caused by humans, time and time again, scientists have looked at the question over and over again to prove out the theory, and they found it to be correct, which is why we say that the scientific consensus, basically 1,100 to 1, is that climate change is real and that it's caused by humans.
Yes, and Randy Weber represents a special little corner of hell I call Southeast Texas. And it's November, it's the middle of November here. We're wearing shorts in Texas. I mean, the climate change is real, and in winter it's really great. But it's kind of expensive in the summer when they have to shut off our air conditioning remotely because we've run out of power. I mean, when you run out of power in the place that makes the power, because we have the monopoly on dinosaur juice a lot of places.
I am pretty sure, and we've only got like 30 seconds left, but I'm pretty sure, Jason, that you guys can stay warm on freedom and liberty.
Freedom and liberty cools us down, that is true. And that is the kind of discussion we have in the Congressional House Science Committee. It is a beautiful world we live in.
It's absolutely bonkers. Jason Stanford, Democratic strategist, syndicated columnist, and author from the great state of Texas. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you, Carl. Good talking to you.
All righty. We're going to keep the laughs going. In the next segment, we're going to be talking to Andy Cobb. He's a political satirist. You've seen his videos on YouTube. we're going to be talking about the crazy jokes at Dick Cheney's roast. It was not actually a roast of Dick Cheney. It was one of those things that you would have seen on Comedy Central. Just absolute craziness. Stick around. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be right back.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
When you go on a road trip, you're careful. You follow the signs to arrive at the right place. It's the same online. Read the internet signs along the way, or you may be led astray. For example, look for the .gov at the end of the web address. If it isn't .gov, it isn't the real Social Security website. People are often victimized by misleading advertisers who use terms like Social Security or Medicare to trick the public. These companies charge a fee for free Social Security services. These services include changing your name and getting a new Social Security card. There's no need to pay for services Social Security offers for free. Go to www.socialsecurity.gov. And remember, if it isn't .gov, it isn't Social Security.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. So I bet you had no idea that Dick Cheney had a roast and you were not invited. Some of his best friends from the good old days of Bush Cheney gathered together and held a roast. And I wanted to chat about it with somebody I consider to be extremely funny. Our good friend Andy Cobb, the satirist whose videos have tickled the funny bones of many people. And Andy, I apologize for that introduction. Thanks for joining us.
Carl,
they've tickled the funny bone of many people.
The comedic stylings of Andy Cobb have tickled the funny bone of many millions.
So,
How are you, man?
if you were at this, okay, first I want to read some of the jokes that were prepared and given. So, former Senator Joe Lieberman, very popular in progressive circles,
we love him.
is quoted as saying something to the effect that it's nice that we're all here at the plaza instead of in cages after some war crimes trial.
Oh,
Zing!
Oh, it kills. It kills. It kills our hopes for the future. That joke kills. I think Joe Lieberman is the perfect guy to roast Cheney because, I mean, a roast is a comedic challenge.
Right.
It means you have to exaggerate the shortcomings, the moral shortcomings of a person for comedic effect. Ultimately, you're saying, this is a good guy, but we're going to blow out of proportion the misdeeds of this person.
I mean, it's basically comedy on a pinpoint, right? You can make jokes about an ethnicity or a religion or whatever, as long as people know in your heart of hearts that you're doing it from a place of love and that you don't actually hate the people.
Absolutely. And when you're dealing with somebody who has so much hate in his heart, in his broken heart, what do you do? What do you do? I really feel for Joe. I mean, and I've never said these words before in my life, Carl. I really feel for Joe Lieberman on this, in the sense that as a comic, there's really no blowing up or exaggerating of Cheney's misdeeds. I mean, what do you do? I mean, blowing up Alderaan? How do you magnify his actual misdeeds? Which I think leads us to a real crisis that we're facing in this country, Carl. And
What's that?
I want to get kind of serious for a minute because we're facing a deficit problem. And it's not a financial deficit crisis. It's not a monetary deficit crisis. It's a deficit of metaphors. and we saw that this morning when people are comparing the problems with healthcare.gov to Katrina.
Right.
And I think we're going to run into this over and over again when we compare the problems with this administration to the problems of the prior administration.
In fairness, though, Kanye West did put out a statement saying that Barack Obama hates people with junk insurance policies.
Kanye is his own metaphor.
And Michael Myers, by the way, said it's just fine in Canada. So, yeah, I mean, let's look at that. I mean, we saw during the hearings over healthcare.gov, politicians struggling to make, when they were, grilling Secretary Sebelius, the former governor of Kansas, struggling to make Wizard of Oz references. And now they're, likening it. This is, first of all, just the idea that Republicans would say this is Barack Obama's Katrina is hysterical.
Hysterical and outrageous. And we're going to keep running into this. If we try and compare stuff to the Iraq War, if we try and compare to Katrina, the terrible misdeeds of the Bush administration really are going to fail us in simile and metaphor every time.
But I feel like Rodney Dangerfield could have delivered this metaphor. It's like because they think it's as bad, it's something so bad that this is what they would do.
Yeah. You get no respect. I think that if we're going to search for a metaphor from the Bush administration, let's go to one that we can relate to, and that's Cheney shooting his best friend in the face.
Right.
And I will go so far as a progressive to say this healthcare.gov, the problems with the website are causing actual problems and actual headaches. So let's compare it to that. Let's say this event that's embarrassing and messy and nobody died.
Right.
That's exactly what healthcare.gov. It's Cheney shooting somebody in the face. And I want to put an offer out there today, and I'm very serious about this, Carl. If Joe Biden would like to shoot somebody in the face, because part of what they're facing here is a slow news cycle that's throwing attention to this. If he wants to shoot somebody in the face, I will step up as a patriot and as an American, and Joe Biden can shoot me in the face anytime he wants. I don't want to die, but I'll keep the scars and let him sign it. That is a news story.
That's patriotic, my friend. So,
thank you, buddy. I do what I can for our country.
Also at the roast was Scooter Libby, the Cheney aide who was convicted of misleading the FBI in its investigations concerning the leak of Valerie Plame's identity. And so Libby made a lot of jokes about his conviction, saying that George Bush had sent a note saying, "Pardon me, I can't make it." He also joked that Cheney's dog had urinated in a cabin at Camp David and that Cheney had sought a pardon, but Bush refused.
Scooter.
Yeah, I mean, for people that have followed it, I mean, a lot of people say that the point at which Bush and Cheney finally separated, when Bush finally cut his umbilical cord to Darth Cheney, was when Cheney came to him asking for a pardon for Scooter Libby, and Bush refused. And Cheney said that he was leaving a soldier on the battlefield.
That's right. What an apt metaphor. It's exactly like leaving a dying soldier on the battlefield.
Cheney has a lot of experience with with putting soldiers in harm's way.
Fair point. And I really feel like what a lovely metaphor for him to draw, having put so many soldiers in harm's way and left them behind, to draw this comparison to a felon. And Cheney had a lot to be worried about. I think you remember that he was worried that that hackers were going to tap into his
pacemaker, right?
Yeah. I don't, and actually caused him to have a heart attack. So this was a legitimate.
And he learned this by watching Homeland.
Yeah, which I think is where he got most of his foreign affairs news. But I think there may be some truth to this, actually, and I wouldn't put it past Cheney to have souped this up in the wake of these concerns and actually gotten some apps for his pacemaker. Who knows? If he's got an app that between games of Candy Crush, he can actually go and screw up healthcare.gov and then go back to his Angry Birds game. It seems like classic Cheney.
I think there should be a Cheney edition of Angry Birds. Only he'd be doing everything he can to help the pigs.
Yeah, absolutely. Shooting back at the birds.
He's
swallowing his own filth.
The traitor bird with the grimace on its face. So where do you see things going from here? I mean, obviously, comedians have had a lot of fun with this and proving the point yet again that comedians are not right or left. They're after illustrating the craziness of our politics. Where do you see the healthcare discussion going?
Well, it's been interesting to see Jon Stewart sort of criticize the Obama administration. He's been considered sort of an Obama cheerleader for a while, and it's interesting to go the other way on this. But ultimately, we are talking about a website. We are talking about concerns with a website. And the same way that we had our fun with the demise of MySpace, and we had our comedic fun with when Pets.com went under, we're going to have our fun with this. But I think ultimately we're going to go back to the fact that if we're choosing between a screwed up website and pre-existing conditions, we are comics, but we're also people who go to the doctor. So I think we're going to fall on the side of humanity on this. Dennis Miller maybe being the exception.
I certainly hope.
Being the exception.
Andy Cobb, political satirist, the maker of fine videos that make us all laugh. You can find his work at andycobbonline.com. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Go.
This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and when we come back, we're going to talk to our good friend, Dr. Digipol, Alan Rosenblatt. Stick around.
WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Oh, drat these computers.
Have you people ever seen computers before?
I hear there's rumors on the internet.
I've used on the Google.
I gotta get on that internet. I'm late on everything.
A series of tubes.
They're so naughty and so complex.
Computers are my forte.
It never gets old hearing President Bush saying, I hear there's rumors on the internets, or the former senator of Alaska saying on the system of tubes. Joining us now, our good friend, as he does every week, Dr. Digipol, Alan Rosenblatt. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here, Carl. How are you?
I'm good. So more diplomacy via Twitter.
Yeah. This week, this past week, when the negotiations over the nuclear agreement with Iran broke down, John Kerry, Secretary of State, tried to pass it off as problems with, the Iranians had to go back and talk to their superiors. And the foreign minister of Iran shot back over Twitter, saying, Mr. Secretary, was it Iran that gutted over half the U.S. draft Thursday night and publicly commented against it Friday morning, following up moments later with, no amount of spinning can change what happened within within 5+1 in Geneva from 6 p.m. Thursday to 5:45 p.m. Saturday. It can further erode confidence. So there was a pushback saying, that this wasn't about going back for approval, but that the proposal had been completely gutted by the U.S., and that was the problem. Despite the fact that John McCain tweeted that, thank God the French stopped the whole process, which was also apparently not true according to the Iranians. And for me, that raises the whole question of, what role does Twitter and social media play in public diplomacy? I remember when Beth Becker and I were on the social media training back at Netroots Nation a few summers ago. Beth was criticizing President Obama for not being such so good and so interactive on social media once he became president. And one of the suggestions was that he could talk to other heads of state, and so that just raised the whole question of social media diplomacy. And I think it's a really interesting idea. I'm working actually now on an event next week for my Internet Advocacy Roundtable, where I'm bringing in some new media directors from some of the embassies around town, some of the foreign embassies around town, and to look at how they're using new media, social media, digital media, to do public diplomacy. And I think that this exchange, or actually half exchange, coming from the Iranians, with virtually no response from the State Department through the same means, on Twitter, raises some very interesting opportunities.
Well, and it's not the first time the Iranians have used Twitter to kind of get their message out. I've had this sense that the Iranians are being helped by some kind of American consultants.
That's entirely possible, but I don't know who. I haven't heard who. You're right. Earlier on, the new president, Rouhani, as well as Zarif, who tweeted at Kerry earlier during the negotiations, both sent out Rosh Hashanah greetings, New Year greetings via Twitter to Jews celebrating the New Year.
Well, and they've used it. They've also used it to try and soften the appearance of Iran with the new presidency and everything else, to try and put on a softer image. We went through weeks of coverage about a good couple weeks of coverage about that, and they're obviously using social media because they know that it has a big impact on the way that things are covered here, at least. What was interesting to me was this notion. I remember one of the questions that was posed to one of the official Iranian Twitter handles was whether or not the Iranian people would have the same access to Twitter, unfettered access to Twitter, that its leaders have.
Yeah, that is a challenging question, and historically, so far, that has not been the case, at least under the previous administration there. I've always, and I think we've talked about this before, been a fan of the use of Twitter by government officials as a way of increasing trust in government, creating more transparency, and certainly the Iranians have taken the lesson to heart. This kind of public diplomacy via social media really opens the door to a direct connection to the public, who can then take that positive impression and impress it upon their own leadership within their own countries through traditional grassroots organizing and advocacy means.
Well, and towards that end, our State Department hasn't responded in kind. That's probably just as a thoughtful decision as responding in kind over social media, when to use and when not to use.
True.
You don't want to necessarily grant credence to this, although it looks like most people are saying that the talks, while they did break down, are at least still headed in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I think that's good, and maybe it is the use of Twitter to kind of raise this issue that sort of, in a way, Zarif was successful at putting pressure on the United States to keep at it. Maybe he was successful at conveying the idea that Iran is not stepping away from these negotiations, that they only stepped away because the draft was changed so substantially, and that there was some opportunities in the original draft. But it also gave rise to hardliners in the United States, like McCain, in Iran and in Israel, using social media and other channels to raise objections to the proposed agreement, that it was just too soft on Iran. So, it does open up the dialogue to both sides. but it opens up the dialogue.
Well, and perhaps that's what's important, and that, it's important that that's happening here. Senator Kerry is obviously no slouch when it comes to social media and using these tools. Neither is the Obama administration. And as we continue to deal with the aftermath of the healthcare.gov debacle, it's interesting to see these other stories in how the government is using technology. And it's also been interesting to see the president, just to kind of go off on a tangent here, begin to talk about government IT procurement reform, which is something you and I have talked about on the show before. Right. It's interesting to now see, he brought it up in an interview with Chuck Todd, and he brought it up at his press conference this week. But it doesn't necessarily make it any more likely that any kind of procurement reform is going to happen, given how much money is invested in the system being the way it is.
Well, that's a big challenge, and I think it's important for people to understand that there is a big difference between building technology for the government, which is the procurement, and it's a tech implementation issue, as opposed to using platforms like Twitter and Facebook to communicate, because those platforms exist. They're built by private sector companies, and it's not a technology play to use them, but it's a communications play. Although,
in fairness, and we've got like a minute left, the Obama administration did have to create new rules in order to be able to freely interact on social media.
Absolutely, because the law prevents the White House from creating pages on websites that have advertising. So they had to work out with Facebook the separate terms of services that took the ads off the Facebook page for the White House. Yeah, that's a very good point.
And not just that, but having things available for public comment and everything else, it just was so antiquated. I mean, it just shows you how far behind we are when it comes to government IT, that the laws are so old. I mean, when folks bid on the right to build the healthcare.gov website, one of the requirements was that it had to be Y2K compliant, if you can believe it or not.
Oh, really? Well, it's always good to make things retrospectively.
We don't want healthcare.gov to collapse the American way of life.
Oh, that's great.
Thankfully, I've still got my bunker from 2000.
Right. Well, that's good. I'm sure it's wired for the internet.
Yeah, I've got some pretty sweet 74 BPS dial-up connection going on. AOL, I've built a small fort out of AOL CD-ROMs, but
I think they actually protect from radiation.
They do. Alan Rosenblatt, Dr. Digipol, always great to talk to you as always, and look forward to chatting with you in the next show about the latest as it comes to our politics, our government, and technology, the intersection thereof. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Alrighty. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be back for the final segment of the show. Did you know that if you don't watch Fox News, even Tea Partiers can become liberal? Believe it or not, we'll talk to Paul Rosenberg, who wrote about this very subject at Salon.com. Stick around, you won't want to miss it. We'll be right back.
For me, guns are for hunting and protecting my family. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I'll fight to protect it. But with rights come responsibilities. That's why I support comprehensive background checks, so criminals and the dangerously mentally ill can't buy guns. That protects my rights and my family.
Tell Congress, don't protect criminals. Vote to protect gun rights and our families with comprehensive background checks. Demand action now.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Shuster, your host of Take Action News. On our show, we talk government, politics, and what you can do to have an impact. We're nonpartisan, report like hell, and let the chips fall where they may. We feature segments like social media, activists of the week, and the latest news affecting our communities. So join us every Saturday and make a difference. Yes, you and I, we can do this. That's Take Action News on the air, online, and at your podcast convenience on iTunes each week on the We Act Radio Network.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org. Or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
100% success rate in modifying your home. Free consultation. At 10%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit HUD.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
Welcome back. Take Action News as we finish up the show. Great piece in Salon.com from Paul Rosenberg about the simple fact that we are a center-left country and that when even Tea Partiers turn off Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, they become more liberal. Such a great piece, in fact, that I had to bring Paul on to talk about it. He also writes for Random Lengths News. You can follow him on Twitter at Paul H. Rosenberg. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, I've got to get a confession off my chest. Back in my youth, I was a right-winger, and I grew up and became liberal, thank God. But I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh in my high school through a radio where I had a headphone snaked up my sleeve so that I could listen during class. And I got to tell you, it is so entertaining that it does have the ability to brainwash. And they know precisely, I mean, they've mastered this over 25 years, how to play all the right chords to convince people that what they feel is correct, even if it's not. And one of the things that occurs to me as I read your piece at Salon.com, you talk about how the country is in fact center-left and not center-right, as a lot of members of the Beltway chattering class like to say. What's interesting to me is that I've seen, after working at Media Matters for 5 years, I would see public poll after public poll where people are asked to describe their political philosophy, but they're only given three options, right? Conservative, moderate, or liberal. And because of the way that certain terms have been used over the years and just the way that people feel about certain words, a lot of people would pick conservative over the other two options. If you don't follow politics like we do, watching the news every day, reading the paper, etc., like most Americans don't do that, you might say conservative just because the values that are conservative, a traditional family, balancing your checkbook, seem like the things that might drive you more than your politics. But when you add the word progressive into such polling, conservative, independent or moderate and progressive. The word progressive outpolls moderate or even conservative. So how did you come to the conclusion that we're a center-left country and not center-right?
Well, as I say in the piece, there's this book, a classic in public opinion, that was written back in 1967, and it was based on polling that was done via Gallup in 1964. So this is the Goldwater-Johnson election period, and it showed even then that half the country identified themselves as conservative in terms of ideology based on some a panel of questions they asked. And in terms of self-identification, it wasn't quite as many, but it was still more people called themselves conservatives than liberals at the very same time that Johnson won this epic landslide where Goldwater only won 4 states in the South plus his home state of Arizona. So, I mean, there was just no contest in terms of 60% of the population voted for Johnson, and yet more people called themselves conservatives even then. So there was this distinct break. But then when you look at why did Johnson win, well, all the policies in terms of government spending were aligned with what Johnson was doing. When you ask people, should we be spending more on education, more on housing, more on health care? Yes, 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 all down the line. And when you look at the General Social Survey, which is the most extensive poll that's been going on since 1973.
Right.
They do it every other year now, and they ask, something like 1,500 people, hundreds and hundreds of questions, and wrapped in the middle of that are questions on, national spending, and so they break it down, and you can ask, are you liberal? How liberal are you, or how conservative? And they give people like a 7-point scale, so they can be very detailed. I'm extremely liberal, extremely conservative, or somewhere in the middle. And you take that breakdown and you look at it, and even people who call themselves conservatives will still say spend more money rather than spend less.
Well, and you identify one of the problems is that when you've got a media that constantly reinforces your political beliefs at the expense of facts or truth, it makes it harder for you to see things clearly. But when those things are removed, it makes it possible. So we've all had conversations with conservative friends where we've pointed out, for example, on climate change, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that climate change is real and that humans are at least partly to blame. But when all of your media says the exact opposite, because you're only listening to talk radio and Fox News and reading the Weekly Standard and the Washington Times, you're going to say the exact opposite. But you've found that when people stop listening to those media sources, they tend to get more liberal.
Yeah, and this also reflects my experience as a local reporter for Random Lengths News. I've covered local issues there for a decade now, and one example was what was called the Sustainability Plan, where the Sierra Club on one side and the Chamber of Commerce on the other sat down and they developed a plan for waterfront development. It was sort of a community plan in opposition to what the port wanted to do. And the port was, sort of dominated by bureaucratic thinking where its main relationships are with international companies. Mm-hmm. And so they've got this sort of, top-down mentality. And the community, meanwhile, they're used to dividing the community. But the people in the community, from conservative business leaders to environmentalists, were able to find more in common than, with each other than with the port when it came down to brass tacks. And they, what they did was look at solving real everyday problems, like how are we going to solve the traffic problems? How are we going to make it a good place for people to live in terms of breathing clean air as well as having a good paying job? And, when you bring it down to the most practical level of solving problems, that's where the babble about labeling, politics in terms of labels, really, really diminishes. And so you get a very good view of how people with different priorities can nonetheless find ways to satisfy the core concerns of each other, and give and take that doesn't necessarily have to be a sacrifice. I mean, you can work more subtly and find things that work synergistically. So rather than everybody giving up something precious, they find that what they can give up is less central to them than what they get to keep.
Well, and you also point out
it's a different way of thinking than what is cultivated in the media. It requires a problem-oriented, problem-solving orientation and a practical orientation.
Well, and you tend to see those types of resolutions a lot in local politics. For example, one of the first things I did as I was switching parties was work on a school bond campaign in northern LA County in California. And the area was dominated by Republican politicians, but they were all in support of the school bond. You go into more contentious areas, and no Republicans were in favor of the school bond. So, but one of the things you point out, just to get to the national politics here, are issues like Medicare and Social Security. Republicans in Congress and the national talkers all talk about how we need to cut them and everything else. But when you actually poll Republicans, the programs are wildly popular with Republicans and even Tea Party members.
Yeah, well, even the national politicians know that. They rarely say we need to cut Social Security and Medicare. They say we need to cut entitlements.
Right.
They want to get the Democrats to be the ones to explicitly say, let's cut Social Security, so they can then, share the heat with them, or even blame Democrats exclusively.
Well, and
I mean, that just goes to show how much they are aware of the manipulation that they are engaged in.
Well, and to that point, are there other areas where we see some commonality, where you wouldn't expect conservatives to be on the right side of an issue, but they actually are, despite what their media says?
Well, one thing is in the area of welfare, and we don't have a lot of data to show this because it isn't usually looked at this carefully. But back in 1986, the General Social Survey did a special one-time, what they call a module, and they asked people, here's a specific setup, and they varied it, like an unmarried woman with 2 kids, or a married couple with 3 kids, or whatever, and they varied it, and they varied the reasons, the circumstances, and asked people about the amount of money that they should receive. And it turned out that even though welfare is very unpopular, even with liberals, when you ask about welfare as opposed to assistance to the poor, level of support goes very, very low. But then, when you present them with a case-by-case, here's the situation, how much should this family get? It turned out that 98% of the people asked said they should get the same, or in most cases, the vast majority of cases, more money than they were actually getting at the time. 98%.
Yeah, it just shows you how much the context matters and how the framing that the media does really does impact the way that people think about these things.
And it's reasonable because there's solid data that in their everyday lives, like conservatives, churchgoers particularly, give a lot of money to charity.
Right.
And I mean, some of that's scam. There are some churches that that hit their parishioners and then don't use it for very godly purposes. But a lot of them do. A lot of them.
Well, I mean, Catholic Charities is a good example, right?
And help the poor.
Catholic Charities is a good example. I dislike a lot of what the Catholic Church does, but Catholic Charities feeds more hungry people in this world than just about anything.
Yeah, exactly. So, that really is close to people's everyday values, and it really shows through there.
Paul, absolutely fascinating piece. Be sure to follow him at Paul H. Rosenberg on Twitter and follow his work at Random Lengths News. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Once again, I want to thank Peter and Rachel and Troy for helping out on controls. Be sure to visit us online at Take Action News and sign up for our podcast on iTunes. For all of us here at Take Action News, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next weekend.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.